Ah, Igknights, the deck that was once the darling of online duelists that lost almost all of its popularity when it was clarified that you couldn't combo it with number 66 effect. Interestingly enough, Igknights is still a good quality competitive deck, so why don't they win more top 16s or top 32s? For me, I think the reason is that too many people focus exclusively on Igknight number 86 turbo decks without giving themselves another option if that strategy is not successful, or they focus too much on the Tyrant Throws strategy, and that doesn't pan out too well most of the time because you can't search for throws. So, with that said, what does my Igknight deck look like? The archetype breakdown of Igknights is rather self-explanatory since, from a monster perspective at least, since each Igknight is a normal no-effect monster and has the exact same effect when placed in the Pendulum Zone. The only difference is attack and defense and the level of monster. For my deck, I run 2 copies of both level 6s, 3 copies of both level 5s, 3 copies of both level 4s, and 2 copies of both level 3s, for a total of 20 Igknight monsters. Barring anyone discovering some amazing, previously unknown tech strategy, any competitive Igknight deck needs to have a high monster count because of their pendulum effects. While Igknights search by destroying themselves, the player is technically taking a negative whenever this effect is activated due to hand size changes. Of course, this negative is cushioned a bit because the cards go to the extra deck rather than going to the graveyard, but it's still a negative. For an Igknight deck to have a consistent level of success, you typically have to open with at least 3 Igknights in hand, or at least a way to get 3 in hand. A number of people might look at this monster count and kind of question running the level 3s, but again, the issue for me is consistent speed, which those level 3s assist with, as well as being important links in a secondary strategy that you'll see later. Continuing with the non-Igknight monsters, another commonplace monster in most Igknight decks are members of the Rescue family. I run 1 Rescue Rabbit, as Igknights are normal monsters, and 2 Rescue Hamsters, for they are also pendulum monsters. Rabbit and Hamster are excellent cards for this deck, netting pluses when their effects are used, and dramatically increasing the versatility of your plays. Closing up the monsters, here's where we zig rather than zag, I guess. I run 2 copies of Krebons and 1 copy of Recover. I run these cards because there are some very nice synchro opportunities available for fast-moving pendulum decks like Igknights. One of the important advantages of synchro summoning over XZ summoning is that the Igknights return to the extra deck instead of going to the graveyard as XZ material, ensuring that you have cards to play with in the future if your opponent has some sort of way of stopping your play or coming back after you make your play. Finally, I think using Psychic monsters is the best bet for this type of deck because they can be special summoned from the deck with emergency teleport, as well as normal summoned from the hand. I use these 2 cards over something like Ghost Ogre for flexibility purposes, although I do side Ghost Ogres. That ends the monsters for this deck. Yes, I'm well aware that I have no copies of Royal Magical Library in this deck. While a number of people may view Royal Magical Library as a staple in an Igknight deck, I'm not really a fan of Royal Magical Library. In my experience, running it, you get the chief problem that if you don't draw it into your opening hand or very close to it, it is basically worthless because Igknights typically do not run back row, at least the decks that try to be fast. There are some builds that kind of run more of a control build structure, but those decks, in my experience, have more consistency problems. So, without this back row, unless the opponent is running Tyrant Throws, they need to move quickly to set up their plays. Thus, most, if not all, of the spell use, either via actual spells or Igknight Pendulum activation, will occur during the first turn, especially if they go second. Therefore, if Royal Magical Library is not summoned early in your first turn, then the card really loses a lot of its usefulness in the deck because you won't have any spells to actually take advantage of its effect. Also, Royal Magical Library might almost become basically worthless in a Solemn Notice world, which may be the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! After Breaker of Shadows is released for a little while. So, while Royal Magical Library is fantastic first turn, you're not going to get it first turn in a position where you can actually utilize it effectively more often than you're not going to draw it first turn. Thus, it becomes kind of a wasted card. So I don't run it. Just to make sure I do not forget them, though, can we avoid talking about how bad Champion and Lancer are for this archetype in general? Everyone good about not talking about how bad these two cards are? Good? Alright, let's move on then. For the spells, I run only one of my general staples in Raigeki, and some people might not even think running Raigeki is warranted, which I can certainly understand. But for me, Raigeki is important because there are a number of times when you're not going to have that perfect setup to control the game, and your opponent can go off, and holding that Raigeki to blast a number of their non-Magispector monsters away can be rather useful. Obviously, when you're facing Magispectors, Raigeki gets sided out. The rest of the spells involve one simple concept in some way, shape, or form: speed. Obviously, to start, I run 3 copies of Upstart Goblin and 3 copies of Summoner's Art. The loss of reinforcement of the army from 3 to 1, not surprisingly, hurts this deck. So I only run 1 copy of Rhoda because that's all I'm legally allowed to run. However, because Igknights are normal monsters, I run 2 copies of Painful Decision. While Painful Decision is not a great substitute for Rhoda, it is a serviceable one, for the only real problem with this card is the inability to activate more than 1 per turn, because the sending to the graveyard isn't a huge loss. But with only 2 copies, the probability of getting 2 in 1 turn is rather unlikely. As mentioned above, I run 3 copies of Emergency Teleport for synchro speed. And finally, again, because Igknights are normal monsters, I run 1 copy of Dark Factory of Mass Production, which allows me to get back my Igknights that are lost to the graveyard if my opponent hits me with a Solemn, either warning or notice, if they go sent there as XZ materials or some other means. The nice thing about Factory is I play it, get my 2 Igknights, more than likely I'm gonna have my scale. And I can do something set up my scale and do something just off that 1 card. A couple of spells I don't run, as can be clearly obvious. I don't run Chicken Game because I'm not a fan of running cards that allow your opponent to draw unless you actually gain the advantage from running that card, and I don't see that advantage in this deck when running Chicken Game. I think it gives your opponent more options to stop your plays than it helps you to advance your own plays. And anyways, if you look at the deck, what do you really take out for Chicken Game in the end? Chicken Game isn't superior, in my opinion, to any of the cards that I run in this deck. Also, with a deck that has a high frequency ability to OTK and has temporary lockdown potential via something like number 86, I don't like not being able to do damage to my opponent because he or she happens to have fewer life points at the time. Overall, I think Chicken Game is just a bad card in any OTK viable deck that doesn't revolve around some incredibly powerful monster card like Neos, for example. Also, while Pot of Riches is certainly a possibility for this deck, I like the consistency of Dark Factory a little more. The ability to guaranteed to set up my scale on turn 3 or 4, typically, if the duel's still going. The 2 Igknight specific spells do not really interest me, as Reload is kind of a strange card for Igknights because of the innate searching effects associated with Igknights. It could be a possibility for those decks trying to execute a specific spell trap strategy like Tyrant's Throes and need the extra movement through the deck, but overall, while the card does break even, unless drawn in the opening turn, it has a limited probability of actually being useful, in my opinion, in an Igknight deck. Also, the you cannot draw anymore by card effect restriction might actually kill any usefulness of this card depending on the type of build. Phoenix is another card that is just alright at the moment. The key potential to Phoenix is that it searches any Igknight card, not just monsters, so if Igknights ever get some incredible support in the future, then this card could basically become a staple, but at this time I don't think Igknights have that amazing, wow, I need to get this into my hand as fast as possible card, so Phoenix doesn't work for me. Finally, as one can see, I don't main deck any traps. One obvious question regarding this decision from some Igknight players may be the lack of Tyrant's Throes. While Throws is definitely a nice card for the deck, it is not easily searchable, making it inconsistent. Also, after Breakers of Shadows, the meta will more than likely be dominated by Solemn Notices and Twin Twisters to counter those notices. Thus, Throws could very well be a casualty of that war. For Anti-Luminescent Knight cannot protect Throws from Twin Twister like it can protect Throws from Mystic Space Typhoon. Also, while Igknight Burst is a nice card in theory, I find that it really is not useful in this Synchro XZ hybrid Igknight deck that I run. Moving on to the extra deck, not surprisingly, I run a mixture of Synchros and XZ monsters. For the Synchros, I run one Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, one Ignister, Prominence, the Blasting Dracoslayer. This card is very nasty, and in a lot of respects, Pendulum should not have access to it. One Crimson Blader, one PSY-Frame Lord Zeta, two Metaphys Horus. This card is very nasty and ignites because it receives both the normal and pendulum effect when summoned, so it can walk through any battle trap that your opponent might have set for you, and it can steal an opponent's monster. And finally, one copy of Hi-Speedroid Chambara, which I think should be a staple in any deck that can make level 5 synchros. For the XZs, I run one number 39 Utopia Beyond, drop all your opponent's tax to 0, basically make it like the monster isn't even there. One Tiras, Keeper of the Genesis, get those free pluses. I run one Shark Fortress for OTK purposes. I run one number 101, one Castel, the two most important rank 4s that remain legal. Obviously, you gotta have that heroic champion Excalibur, being a warrior deck, and you need that raw power. Even more obviously, one number 86 heroic champion, and because I have the level 3s, I like to run one rank 3. I prefer mech-equipped engineer because it offers some level of protection if I've gone on more of a synchro path in the given duel. I can put that on the field to offer an additional layer of protection. Some might note the lack of a Hazy Flame Basilitrice. This card is definitely an option, but the way I view this deck being played is that it's inferior to number 86. And a vast majority of the time, you're really only going to get one shot at a quote-unquote eggs in one basket monster during the duel, and that really should be number 86 over Basilitrice, because let's be honest, number 86 is significantly better. In the end, from my personal experience, Igknight's success in competitive play, I think, has probably been marred by too much focus on trying to lock an opponent down either through number 86 or Tyrant Throws, where if neither play is available, the deck's built in a way that it really struggles. I think this build pushes Igknights in an interesting different direction because it provides another option via synchro plays with cards like Trishula, Blasting Dracoslayer, Crimson Blader, and Horus, etc., to produce positive plays that increase victory probability while maintaining strong XZ potential for the deck as well. Well, that is my Igknight deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.